Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear brothers, sisters, viewers, and friends of Ikra TV. Welcome to another edition of Real Talk. I'm your host Iqbal Bana. As I keep saying to you every week, I come into your homes, into your lives, intervening, trying to bring to your attention issues, or to your attention issues that are of interest or concern to the Muslim community in particular, and trying to raise awareness of issues that we feel are important to our community. And every week I try and bring to you people of interest. People can share their knowledge, their experience, to try and improve our day-to-day living conditions, our status in life, etc., and give us information about what is going on around our lives, around the country, around the nation, and internationally as well. Over the past 10, 12 weeks, the majority of my programs have focused on what is happening in Gaza, the tragedy that has been unfolding in front of our eyes, the genocide, the apartheid that has been going on over the last 15 weeks, 4 or 5 months, but also the context in which over the past 75 years the people of Gaza and Palestine have found themselves in as well. So every now and then I try and make sure that I bring something different to you, because I think we're all sensitized to some of the things that's going on, and we need to be sensitive to what is going on, but also we need to take the appropriate actions in terms of how we can help our brothers and sisters. Some of that is to do with finance, trying to give as much money and donations as we can, making du'as for them, but also trying to see how politically we can make a difference to what is going on in the politics of this country. So in between, we brought politicians here to talk about the situation in Palestine, particularly British foreign policy and how Britain has responded to the issue of the attacks that are taking place on the people of Gaza, and particularly in Gaza, and particularly also, but also in the West Bank. Today, I just want to shift slightly some of the discussion debate to talk about the state of our health in this country, and also in terms of education, where we are as a Muslim community in terms of health inequalities and the underachievement of some of our young people in the education system. So I have today somebody with me for whom I have known for many, many years. It's the first time he has been on my program, and that's not because I've not asked him to come on my program before. I have, but he's a very shy person. But finally, after many, many years of trying to persuade him to come on my program, he has finally relented and agreed to join me. He's a man that many people, not just locally but internationally, know, who has worked in the health and education field consistently over many, many years with total dedication and commitment. He's also one of the most staunch fighters for equality and justice, and has been at the forefront of equality in this country, not just across the health and education, but across all stratas of life. So I'm really, really deeply honored to have introduced to you a very dear friend of mine, Ali Jan Haider, who used to be the Director of Commissioning at the local NHS Trust, but now is the Director of Integrated Healthcare Service within the Bradford NHS Trust itself. So Ali Jan, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Finally, welcome to my program. After many years of asking, I'm deeply honored and delighted that you've agreed, you've succumbed to take the time out to be here with me today. Thank you for joining me, thank you for coming, and thank you for sharing some time with us. Now, as I say, you used to be the Director of Commissioning, which in itself was a major role. Now you're the Director of Integrated Healthcare. But can I also say, I also forgot to mention, Ali Jan has been at the forefront of Muslim education establishments in this part of the world, and has helped many other Muslim schools to be established across the country. He's currently the Chair of Trustees of Faversham School, which is a secondary school, isn't it, in Bradford?
We have both primary and secondary.
And it is one of the best performing schools in the north of England, if not in the UK. So he has been instrumental in the setting up, establishing that particular school, which is for girls, and that school has become one of the major successes in this country. So both of those achievements, plus his work on equality and healthcare, are both phenomenal works that he's been involved with. So Ali Jan, thank you for coming, thank you for joining me, thank you for sharing your time with us today. Just a bit of background, were you were you born in Bradford, or you sort of grew up born in Pakistan and sort of came over to Bradford?
First of all, wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and assalamu alaikum to your audience. And it's a great honour to be here, Iqbal. And
Pleasure is mine.
Pleasures are equally shared. So I was born in Pakistan,
Right.
and I arrived to the UK in 1966,
Wow.
about 3.5, 4 years of age. So you can try and calculate my age now. It's more towards
It's too late.
right hand. Yeah, absolutely right.
You're still younger than me. So that's all I can say.
And so I arrived to Bradford. My father was here, mashallah. He was working in textiles. So I was quite fortunate in the sense that I had the full education, starting from the age of 5 all the way up to 16 and beyond.
Right.
So yes, in that sense, quite privileged to be able to go through the learning process here, and also to be able to understand how it operates. Having said that, when I arrived, England was a different place.
Oh,
And
definitely.
I remember attending school, and I think I was part of the first early cohort of Pakistanis, possibly South Asians, who entered the education system.
Right.
And whilst the education system did its best to accommodate us, there was I suppose the initiation of racism. We were foreigners, we were aliens, and very early on, I think it was important to realise who you were and how you develop coping mechanisms that would not interfere with the education, but at the same time, you could retain your sense of self-identity and self-confidence.
And mashallah, I mean, I, like you, like many other people who came in the 60s and 70s, were the victims of racism in schools. There's no doubt about it. But, you know, I mean, I think over the years it sort of changed from subtle racism in the beginning to actually overt racism in the 70s, you know, in the late 70s, where kids were actually beaten up really badly. I'm not sure whether, you know, it happened in your days, but I mean, I remember that on the last day of school, we used to run away from school early because, you know, the white boys, you know, would beat the daylight out of us. And then the school let it realize what was going on. Initially, the schools didn't do much. They just let it happen, and the police didn't do much. But then they realized that they could not sustain this situation. So they let us out 15 minutes before the white boys were let out, because I went to a boys' school as well. So we had 15 minutes to try and run home and get there to safety before they were let off, you see. So I don't know whether you suffered something similar or not.
There was an identical culture in the schools that I went to. I think certainly there were no primary schools, it was a junior school, infant school, junior school, and then upper school. And in the infant school, I think there was less what we call physical retaliation. There was maybe subtle bullying and harassment. In the secondary school, it was absolutely in your face, quite crude, bullying, fights. And we went through this kind of transition where I think certainly in the 4th, 5th form, we decided that we had to stand up, and we could no longer take this almost middle ground by the teaching staff, who realised, yes, there was quite harsh attacks on us, physical attacks, and we decided to almost come together as a South Asian group and push back. And I think that pushback started to just create this culture of they won't take it lying down. And I think it was a tipping point for the school, because the teachers had to get involved, the police had to get involved. And the school I went to was notorious for racism. It was the heart of what was then the National Front. The National Front was the, if you like, the predecessor to BNP, which possibly was a predecessor to the EDL. Having said that, you know, at the same time, education was important, and our teachers did value us. And that's why many of us from my cohort did quite well at school. There were no GCSEs, there were GCEs and CSEs, and invariably most of the group that I was with, they came out with fairly good results.
That's
so despite,
really unusual, yes,
despite
really
the racism, despite the tension and anxiety that we lived with, we did fairly well at school.
So I mean, most people that I talk to, I mean, you know, their children went to school and they did not go into further education, right? They just finished at the age of 16, 17, because the parents were labourers, as you said, working in the textile industry or the engineering industry, and finance was an issue for most families. So they left school and looked for work and got into employment. What was so different about your group? Because that's really fascinating, that you had this whole cohort of people, who managed. You said that the teachers used to accept and acknowledge the abilities that you had, because in the late 70s and early 80s, careers officers used to just dismiss any expression of interest young Asian and African Caribbeans had to go into further and higher education.
So a dichotomy, I think, is a very valid point you raise. So we did well at 16 with the exams, but the career advice, and also I think for many of us, we did leave school at 16. I did not continue with FE.
Right.
So I didn't do my A-levels. I left at 16 and I embarked on an apprenticeship in engineering. And with hindsight, it was the best thing I did, because I was on the shop floor, I was learning a trade. I was also on a sandwich course at Bradford College, where we studied for a HND.
Right.
So there was a twin track really. There was a hands-on experience of learning the trade, mechanical engineering. At the same time, it was buttressed by the theory. So by the age of 19, 20, you not only had a good job, but you also had qualifications that gave you a window of opportunity for the future. I can't remember many South Asian, my age, contemporaries staying on at school.
Right.
But my point was that between the age of 13 and 16, despite all the distractions around racism and all the adolescence issues that come with that, we did relatively well.
Masha, you've done really well actually. Now, okay, your transmission from, obviously I didn't realize you'd gone into engineering, but then you moved into equality and diversity and fighting for social justice. Right. How did that come about?
So I qualified in, I think it was 1987, as a social worker.
Right.
And I went to Leicester to do my, it was in those days called a CQSW, a Certificate for Qualification in Social Work. And in that 2 years, I started to dissect some of the models that we were using in social work and their applicability to South Asian families, and for me, particularly Muslim families. And if you like, the real chasm between some of the Eurocentric norms and paradigms and their misfit with families. And I also sensed that in and amongst some of the assessments, especially at the sharp end of the wedge, when we were looking at child protection issues, in those days there was lots of material that helped you recognise that discrimination and bias could easily tilt an assessment in a particular way.
So was that built into the system in a way?
So it was part of our critique in learning social work. You know, how do you deliver person-centred work? How do you acknowledge that each person's culture makes them who they are? Religion and culture play a significant role in our identity, in our self-esteem, in the way that we live and operate. And I started to, I suppose, as part of the learning, as part of the assignments and the research, it was quite challenging to notice that there was a dearth of information. There was hardly anything that helped you understand how you could do assessments with families other than white families.
Right.
And our lecturers were quite good because they realised that in order to do that, we had to start to challenge some of that inequality, some of those models that clearly were incongruent with the needs and aspirations and wishes of South Asian families and African Caribbean families as well.
So you devised sort of new models or pathways to working?
We started to explore those, but I think the first thing was to challenge and help our colleagues comprehend the fact that some of those interventions were inappropriate for the clientele they were working with.
Right.
And that was...
How was that received by your fellow colleagues within the social services family?
So when I worked in Bradford, I think there was, when you challenge a group, it's never a homogeneous group. So you'll get the variation between those who absolutely think, yes, I can see where Alijan's coming from, I can see the logic behind his reasoning, to those who might become terribly defensive and feel that I'm being woke or I'm being politically overly correct or I'm being disrespectful of their decades of learning and experience. You know, I was working with teams and sometimes colleagues who had been there for 10, 15 years, and here was I, this new boy on the block, asking questions about the validity of the framework they were using.
I mean, that is like pushing against a immovable wall. I mean, when I went into equality and diversity, that same sort of system affected me as well, because we've been doing this for the last 50, 60 years. Everything's working fine. How dare you come and tell us it's not working properly? So how did you navigate through those challenges?
I think first and foremost by developing a level of confidence in who you are and understanding where I come from, what's my value base, and being able to lean on my values of compassion and care, but transparency and honesty, to be able to lobby those arguments, to be able to negotiate them conversations, to be able to have that dialogue. So, for example, I was given a case early on in my social work career where prior to myself, the team that had worked with this Pakistani family in Bradford had made decisions which took no account of religion, culture, and some of the dynamics that happen in the family. And that culminated with this child coming into care.
Oh no.
And when I looked at the case, I was able to sit down with my team leader. Now, luckily for me, my team leader was really quite receptive to that challenge, but my colleagues were not.
Right.
So because I had the support of my team leader, I was able to land my challenge much more smoothly and amenably than otherwise. But like you say, Iqbal, it's not all plain sailing. And I've been in situations where sometimes there's no real skill set, no matter how placidly or how constructively you challenge someone.
Yes.
It depends on how it lands with them.
Yes.
And if you get an ab reaction, then you can sometimes go away thinking, wow, what does that really mean for me? And it can mean that you might be in a difficult relationship with that person, or it could mean at the most sharp end of the wedge, career suicide, right?
It could be. So the end of the career. Yeah. So
and
obviously that is really fascinating, because a lot of what you're saying, so I can relate to, because I went through a similar experience. As my viewers will know, I've talked about my sort of occasionally, very rarely, I speak about my background, which is working around equality and diversity. So know that I went through something similar. But now you have been working in the health service for quite a while. And how long have you been working in the health sector?
Wow. So I joined the health, it was called the Primary Care Trust, the PCT, in I think it was April 2002.
Wow.
So just over 20
years.
Yeah, 22 years.
22 years,
virtually.
yep. MashaAllah. And obviously then you became Director of Commissioning, and now you're the Director of Integrated Healthcare. And particularly during the pandemic, we saw the inequalities in health actually coming to the forefront. So when you started, obviously the state of the inequality in the health service must have been quite significant.
I think we can dial back, Iqbal. We can dial back to 2002.
Right.
Because what happened just before then was the murder of Stephen Lawrence.
Yep.
And when Stephen Lawrence's murder was exposed by his parents and a very good lawyer, it helped all the organisations recognise how deep-seated institutional racism was. And when Sir Macpherson said that institutional racism was, if you like, all-pervasive in institutions, many organisations that felt responsible took action. So I came in at a time when the Race Relations Amendment Act 2000 was about to be morphed into the organisation. And I was responsible for the implementation of the Act.
Right.
Now, even at that stage, well before COVID, what the Amendment Act helped us to do was identify areas where there was a potential adverse impact on service outcomes. Now we know that employment has always been a big deal, that when it comes to employment, there's still vivid inequalities. So the higher up the hierarchy you go, the less you'll find ethically diverse staff. And organisations recognise that. We have now a workforce race equality scheme that gives us data. Now one of the best and the most robust ways to challenge is having the data. It's being able to be data driven.
So I mean, the Macpherson report, when that came out, for anybody who is not familiar with the Macpherson report, this was the statutory inquiry that was established by the then government to try and find out what were the reasons behind the failure of the police and the other institutions to investigate the murder of Stephen Lawrence, and he came up with 70 recommendations which labeled a lot of the public institutions as being institutionally racist. And for my sins, I was a member of the Stephen Lawrence review group, responsible to the Home Secretary for advising the Home Secretary on how those recommendations were being implemented. And I was a member of the group working very closely with Stephen's mother, Doreen, for many, many years. Now, we'll come back to that because I found that when that report first came out, quite a few of the institutions sort of denied that they were institutionally racist. Now, we've only got 1 minute 25 left before we go break, so I want to talk about that. But then I want to come and talk about the Fawishan Muslim Girls' School,
Sure.
which has been, mashallah, with your help and other colleagues, has become one of the shining examples of a Muslim girls' school, not just in the north, but around the country as well. So I want to really hear more about that. But we'll touch on the institutional racism bit, because I was in local government at that time, and I know it took a long, long time to convince my sort of senior colleagues that that was something that we need to work on. I hope you found what Ali Jan has been sharing with us of some interest. Inshallah, we're going to a break. In the meantime, as I keep saying to you every day when we go for a break, enjoy your tea, coffee, faluda, whatever it is, and I'll see you at the other end of the break. If you want to share your thoughts, your ideas, if you've gone through some of the experiences that Ali Jan and I have gone through, please feel free to ring in 01274 214 299. The number is on your screen. We'd love to hear your thoughts, your ideas about how you navigated through those challenges yourself. And I'm sure we'll learn something from you as well. So as I said, don't go away, be with us, do whatever you need to do. Inshallah, I'll see you very soon. Take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.